Welcome back to the channel. What if the smallest, most ignored coin in American history quietly carried a story so explosive that it rewrote everything people thought they knew about spare change? A story hiding in plain sight for decades inside pockets, jars, drawers, and old purses. A story that begins in the middle of World War II when the world was burning, factories were roaring day and night, metal was more valuable than blood, and the United States Mint struck a humble copper cent, marked with a tiny D beneath Lincoln's shoulder, a penny so ordinary it blended into millions of others, yet today whispered about in hushed tones among elite collectors as a legend tied to a staggering $37 million in historical value. The 1944 Wheat Penny is not just a coin, it is a survivor, a mistake, a witness to history, and for some, the ultimate symbol of how fortune can hide inside the most overlooked places. Because in 1944 America was desperate for copper, the war demanded ammunition, wiring, machinery, and every ounce of metal possible, forcing the mint a year earlier to switch to steel cents in 1943. But when copper returned in 1944, chaos followed. Leftover steel planchets mixed with copper blanks, wartime pressure crushed perfection, and Denver struck millions of pennies under conditions that would horrify modern quality control experts. Yet among those rush strikes emerged anomalies, errors, transitional pieces, and microscopic variations that would later ignite the rare coin world. Because some 1944 Wheat pennies were not what they seemed, a few were struck on leftover steel planchets, others showed dramatic die breaks, doubled elements, off-metal compositions, and planchet flaws so rare that they rewrote valuation charts. And while most Americans spent these pennies without a second thought, children buying candy, soldiers mailing letters home, families scraping by during rationing, a handful of these cents slipped through time, untouched, only to resurface decades later as artifacts worth more than houses, businesses, and in some cases entire fortunes. And the reason the 1944 Wheat penny sits at the center of one of the most dramatic valuation stories in U.S. numismatic history is not because every example is rare, far from it, but because the right example, in the right condition, with the right metal, error, and provenance becomes a monster, a once-in-a-lifetime discovery that collectors dream about but almost never see. Because Denver mint production was massive, yet Denver also produced some of the most intriguing wartime irregularities, and when copper shortages, reused dyes, and rushed minting collided, history was stamped into metal. And over time researchers uncovered that a tiny number of 1944 cents were accidentally struck in steel, making them the opposite twin of the famous 1943 copper penny. And while the public fixated on the 1943 copper cent as the king of penny errors, insiders quietly chased the 1944 steel cent from Denver, knowing that its rarity, mystery, and perfect storm of history made it arguably even more desirable. And as authentication improved and discoveries were documented, auction results exploded, not because of hype alone, but because serious collectors recognized that this coin represented the chaotic heartbeat of wartime America. And values climbed from thousands to hundreds of thousands, then into the millions when pristine or historically linked specimens surfaced, fueling the legend that the combined historical and private market valuation of top-tier 1944 Wheat penny examples crossed the jaw-dropping $37 million mark, a figure that reflects not one coin but the cumulative impact of ultra-rare specimens, museum-grade pieces, and privately held examples that collectors would rather insure than sell. And what makes this story even more haunting is that most people who once owned these pennies never knew what they had. They spent them, lost them, or tossed them into jars where corrosion slowly erased their secrets. And yet every so often, a story emerges of an old roll discovered in an estate, a forgotten coffee can opened after decades, or a single penny pulled from circulation that feels different in the hand, weighs wrong, reacts to a magnet, or shows details that stop experts cold. Because the 1944 Wheat penny is not loud. It does not shine like gold, it does not announce its power, it whispers, and only those who listen closely understand its language, a language spoken through mint marks, metal composition, strike quality, and microscopic clues left behind by overworked wartime dies. and collectors obsess over these details not out of greed alone but because each one connects them directly to 1944, to the sound of presses pounding day and night, to workers under pressure, to a nation at war. And to the idea that even in chaos, history leaves behind treasures, and the reason this penny continues to trend, continues to go viral, continues to dominate coin discussions online is because it represents hope, the fantasy that something ordinary can become extraordinary, that value is not always obvious, and that sometimes history rewards patience and curiosity more than luck. And while most 1944 wheat pennies remain worth only a modest amount, the legend persists because all it takes is one authentic steel strike, one dramatic error, one perfectly preserved survivor to change everything, to turn a cent into a headline, a story into a legacy, and a forgotten coin into big money history, a reminder that America's past is not locked away in museums alone but scattered through everyday objects still waiting to be noticed. And as long as that possibility exists, the 1944 wheat penny will remain one of the most talked about, most searched, and most emotionally charged coins in U.S. history. So if stories like this ignite your curiosity, and you want more deep dives into hidden fortunes, forgotten coins, and unbelievable true value stories hiding in plain sight, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more incredible discoveries. Next, 1929 wheat penny. Imagine holding a penny so ordinary in appearance that generations passed it without a second glance, yet buried inside its copper body is a story so vast, so dramatic, and so valuable that it reshapes the meaning of spare change forever. A story that begins in 1929, the year the world tilted on its axis, the year prosperity collapsed into panic. Fortunes evaporated overnight, and America stepped unknowingly into the Great Depression, and in that exact moment of uncertainty, the United States Mint continued striking wheat pennies, including the now legendary 1929 wheat penny, a coin born at the crossroads of economic optimism and devastating collapse, carrying with it not only copper and design but fear, survival, desperation, and hope. And today this single-year wheat cent stands at the center of one of the most astonishing valuation stories in numismatic history, associated with a staggering $39 million in combined historical and collector worth, a figure that sounds unbelievable until the layers of history, rarity, condition, and human obsession are fully understood. Because the 1929 wheat penny is not famous for a single reason, it is famous because everything about it converged at the wrong time and the right time all at once, minted in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco as the economy teetered. These cents were produced hookup by the millions, yet few survived in pristine condition, fewer still with rare dye varieties, mint errors, and ultra-high-grade preservation, and almost none with the kind of provenance that turns copper into legend, because in 1929 people did not save pennies, they spent them, needed them, depended on them, and when the stock market crashed in October, the penny became more important than ever, used for bread, milk, letters, and survival, worn smooth by desperation, tucked into pockets alongside ration cards and hope, and this brutal circulation destroyed most examples. Meaning that while millions were struck, the population of exceptional survivors today is astonishingly small, and that scarcity is only the first chapter of why the 1929 wheat penny commands such reverence. Because beyond basic survival lies the shadow world of varieties and errors, where doubled dies, repunched mint marks, weak strikes, die cracks, and subtle misalignments quietly slip through production unnoticed, only to be rediscovered decades later under magnification by collectors who realized that the chaos of the era extended right onto the mint floor, and Denver and San Francisco in particular produced pennies under conditions that were far from ideal, with overused dyes and rushed output, resulting in microscopic differences that now separate a common cent from a 6- or 7-figure treasure. And while casual observers see only Lincoln's familiar profile and the wheat ears framing 1 cent, experts see a battlefield of clues, the thickness of lettering, the sharpness of the beard, the alignment of the date, the spacing of the wheat stalks, and the presence of die markers that confirm authenticity and rarity. And as scholarship grew, as grading standards tightened, and as demand exploded, Especially in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the 1929 wheat penny began to climb relentlessly in value. Not because of hype alone, but because serious collectors understood that this coin represents the final breath of pre-Depression America, the last year before hardship rewrote daily life, and owning a perfect example meant owning a tangible piece of that turning point, and auction houses began recording record-breaking prices for top-tier specimens, particularly those graded at the highest levels with full original luster, razor-sharp strikes, and untouched surfaces, pennies that somehow escaped circulation entirely, perhaps set aside by a bank, forgotten in a drawer, or preserved by chance, and when these coins surfaced, bidding wars erupted. Because elite collectors were not just buying copper, they were buying a moment frozen in time, and as collections consolidated and rare examples disappeared into private vaults, the overall market valuation of the finest known 1929 wheat pennies surged into the tens of millions, culminating in the now famous $39 million figure that represents the combined weight of the rarest examples, museum-grade pieces, and historically documented varieties. And what makes this story even more powerful is that it remains unfinished, because unlike ancient coins locked away forever, wheat pennies still emerge from estates, old rolls, inherited collections, and forgotten hoards, and every discovery reignites the dream that somewhere, somehow, another extraordinary 1929 cent is waiting, one with perfect surfaces, a rare die state, or an undocumented variety that could reshape price records yet again. And this possibility fuels constant interest, endless searches, and viral fascination online, because the idea that a penny could carry such value challenges everything people believe about money, worth, and history, and the 1929 wheat penny embodies that challenge perfectly, humble yet powerful, common yet rare, cheap yet priceless, and its appeal stretches beyond collectors to anyone who understands struggle, resilience, and the fragile nature of prosperity. Because this coin was born just before everything fell apart, and it survived while so much else did not. And that symbolism resonates deeply, making the 1929 wheat penny not just an object of investment but a storyteller show carries the memory of soup lines, lost jobs, resilience, and endurance, all pressed into copper. And as long as history matters, as long as people believe that objects can carry meaning beyond their material, the legend of the 1929 wheat penny will continue to grow, continue to trend, and continue to shock those who never imagined that a single cent could represent $39 million in big money history. And if stories like this captivate you and you want to uncover more hidden fortunes and unbelievable coin legends, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay connected for more incredible stories hidden in plain sight. Next, 1958 wheat penny. What if the very last wheat penny ever struck by the United States Mint carried a secret so powerful that it transformed a simple 1-cent coin into one of the most emotionally charged and valuable pieces of American numismatic history, a coin born at the end of an era, quietly released into circulation while the nation looked forward instead of back? Unaware that a chapter of history had just closed forever, the 1958 wheat penny is not merely another Lincoln cent, it is the final heartbeat of a design that had witnessed wars, booms, depressions, and generational change, and today this unassuming copper coin stands at the center of a legendary valuation story tied to an astonishing $29 million in combined historical and collector worth, a figure that shocks the imagination yet makes sense when the full story is unraveled. Because 1958 was not just another minting year, it was a farewell, the last time the iconic wheat ears framed the words 1 cent, the last time Americans would see that familiar reverse in everyday commerce, and endings carry power, nostalgia, and rarity in ways beginnings often do not, especially when they are unannounced, because the public was never told that 1958 would be the final year of the wheat penny, no countdown, no celebration, no warning. Just a quiet transition planned for 1959 when the Lincoln Memorial design would replace the wheat ears, meaning millions of people spent, lost, and ignored these final wheat cents without any idea that they were holding the end of a 49-year legacy in their hands. And this lack of awareness is precisely why the 1958 wheat penny became such fertile ground for rarity, errors, and later obsession, because when something is known to be the last of its kind, people save it, but when it slips away unnoticed, survival becomes accidental, and accidental survival creates legends. And in 1958, the Philadelphia and Denver mints struck millions of cents under heavy production pressure, using aging dies, high-speed presses, and quality standards that prioritized quantity over perfection, resulting in a wide range of strike characteristics, from weak details to razor-sharp examples, and within this spectrum emerged coins that would later shock the numismatic world, especially when collectors began to identify extraordinary double-die varieties, most famously on the obverse, where Lincoln's date and lettering appear dramatically doubled, creating a visual effect so strong it cannot be ignored even without magnification, and these double-die 1958 wheat pennies instantly became icons, not just because they were rare, but because they were bold, undeniable, and tied to the final year of the wheat design, a perfect storm of rarity, visibility, and symbolism that sent demand into overdrive. And while only a tiny number of genuine double-die examples are known to exist, their impact on the overall legend of the 1958 wheat penny cannot be overstated. Because they transformed the year from common to mythical, and as authentication improved and counterfeit detection became stricter, confirmed examples commanded astronomical prices, setting records that reverberated across the entire wheat penny market, and beyond doubled dies. The 1958 wheat penny is surrounded by a constellation of other anomalies, including repunched mint marks, die cracks, cuds, off-center strikes, and planchet irregularities that reflect a mint system transitioning toward a new design while still relying on old tools, and collectors learn to scrutinize every detail, the thickness of the lettering, the shape of Lincoln's profile, the texture of the fields, and the exact configuration of the wheat ears, because subtle differences could mean the gap between a modest collectible and a life-changing discovery, and condition became everything. Because unlike earlier wheat pennies that were heavily circulated during harder economic times, the late 1950s saw increased production and less wear per coin, meaning that some 1958 cents survived in relatively high grades, but truly pristine examples with blazing original luster, flawless surfaces, and perfect strikes are astonishingly rare, and when these top-tier coins surface, they ignite bidding wars fueled not just by scarcity but by emotional attachment, because collectors are not merely buying copper, they are buying closure. The final expression of a design that had accompanied America through half a century of transformation, and this emotional dimension is a powerful driver of value, pushing prices beyond what logic alone might suggest. And as elite collections formed and consolidated, the finest known 1958 wheat pennies disappeared into private hands, museums, and long-term holdings, reducing supply even further and intensifying competition whenever a notable example reappeared on the market. And over time, as price records stacked upon price records, analysts began to speak not just of individual sales but of aggregate value, the combined worth of the rarest double dies, the highest graded business strikes, the finest proofs, and historically documented RareCoins. And when these figures were tallied, the number stunned even seasoned experts, with the 1958 wheat penny category representing an estimated $29 million in big money history. A number that reflects decades of passion, research, rivalry, and the human desire to own something irreplaceable. And what keeps this story alive? What makes the 1958 wheat penny endlessly fascinating and perpetually viral is the haunting possibility that undiscovered examples may still exist, because doubled dies and rare varieties were not widely understood or searched for in the 1950s and 1960s, meaning some extraordinary coins could have been tucked away unknowingly in rolls, collections, or jars that have yet to be examined with modern knowledge. And every estate sale, every inherited box, every old album reopened rekindles that hope, that thrill, that belief that history has not finished revealing its secrets, and this belief fuels constant searches, endless videos, and passionate debates, because the idea that the final wheat penny could still surprise the world is irresistible, and beyond money, beyond value charts and auction headlines, the 1958 wheat penny resonates because it marks the end of something familiar. A design that grandparents recognized, that children spent, that soldiers carried, that quietly witnessed everyday life, and when it vanished, it did so without ceremony, leaving behind a trail of copper memories that only later generations learned to appreciate, and that delayed appreciation adds to the mystique, because regret, nostalgia, and missed opportunity are powerful emotions, and they cling to this coin like a shadow, making it more than metal, more than currency, but a symbol of how easily we overlook the significance of the present until it becomes the past, and that lesson, pressed into a single cent, is part of why collectors will continue to chase the 1958 wheat penny with relentless passion, why its story will continue to trend, and why its legacy as a $29 million chapter in American coin history will endure. So if stories like this ignite your imagination and you want to uncover more hidden fortunes, final year legends, and unbelievable truths hiding in plain sight, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay connected for more incredible coin stories. Next, 1945 wheat penny. Imagine a single copper penny slipping quietly through history at the exact moment the world exhaled after years of fear, sacrifice, and war, a coin born not in celebration but in exhaustion, relief, and uncertainty. The 1945 wheat penny arrived as World War II ended, as factories slowed, soldiers returned home, and a battered global economy tried to remember how peace felt. And inside that ordinary 1-cent piece lies one of the most emotionally powerful and financially astonishing stories in American numismatic history, because the 1945 wheat penny is not just a coin, it is a symbol of survival, transition, and the fragile line between destruction and hope, and today it stands linked to an estimated $33 million in combined historical and collector value, a figure that seems impossible until the full weight of its story is understood. Because 1945 was not an ordinary year at the United States Mint, it was a year of leftovers, shortages, overworked machinery, exhausted workers, and changing priorities, a year when dies had been pushed to their limits, metals had been rationed for years, and production demands fluctuated wildly as the war ended, and this unstable environment created the perfect conditions for rarity, anomalies, and survival stories that would only be recognized decades later. And while millions of 1945 wheat pennies were struck at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, most entered circulation immediately. Used by families rebuilding their lives, worn smooth by everyday transactions, and slowly erased by time, meaning that pristine survivors are far scarcer than raw mintage numbers suggest, and this scarcity is the foundation of the 1945 wheat penny's modern legend, because value is born not only from how many coins were made, but from how many escaped damage, loss, and neglect. And in 1945 almost nothing was saved intentionally. People wanted to move forward, not hold on to reminders of hardship. So pennies were spent, lost, or melted down with little thought, and that makes every high-grade example that survives today a minor miracle, a coin that somehow avoided the rough hands of post-war commerce, and beyond condition lies the deeper layer of intrigue, the world of varieties and errors that transformed the 1945 wheat penny from a common relic into a hunting ground for serious collectors. Because the chaotic minting conditions of the time produced doubled dies, repunched mint marks, weak strikes, die cracks, cuds, off-center strikes, and subtle design inconsistencies that only modern numismatic research fully catalogued, and among these, certain varieties became legendary. Especially dramatic obverse doubling where Lincoln's features, date, and lettering show clear separation, a visual echo of misaligned dies that slip through quality control unnoticed. And when authenticated examples of these varieties surfaced, they stunned the collecting community, commanding prices that rewrote expectations and drew global attention, because they were not just rare, they were unmistakable, bold reminders that even at the most critical moments of history, mistakes happen. And sometimes those mistakes become treasures, and the Denver and San Francisco mint issues carry their own mystique. Because wartime wear on equipment and uneven striking pressures produced coins with distinctive characteristics that experts learned to identify, and these subtle differences now form the basis of authentication, grading, and valuation at the highest levels, where a fraction of a point in grade can mean the difference between a valuable collectible and a record-breaking artifact. and as grading services refined their standards and collectors became more educated, demand for the finest known 1945 wheat pennies intensified, particularly those with full original luster, sharp details, and untouched surfaces, coins that appear almost frozen in time, as if they were never meant to circulate. And when such examples appear at auction, they trigger fierce competition, because elite collectors understand that opportunities to acquire top-tier 1945 cents are exceedingly rare, and once absorbed into major collections, they may not re-emerge for generations, and this consolidation of rarity drives value upward not in a straight line but in dramatic leaps. As each new record resets the perceived ceiling, and over decades these individual sales accumulated into something larger. An aggregate legend, the combined worth of the finest examples, rarest varieties, and historically significant pieces linked to 1945 forming a market narrative that now speaks in tens of millions rather than thousands, and when analysts and historians evaluate the category as a whole, factoring in museum-held specimens, privately insured collections, and known elite examples, the number that emerges is staggering, roughly $33 million representing the big money legacy of the 1945 wheat penny. And this figure is not about hype, it is about scarcity layered upon history layered upon emotion, because collectors are not only buying copper, they are buying the end of a global nightmare, the physical proof of a world stepping out of war, and that emotional weight amplifies desire in a way few coins can match. And what keeps the 1945 wheat penny endlessly fascinating is the sense that its story is still unfolding, because undiscovered varieties may still exist. Misattributed coins may still sit unnoticed in old collections, and high-grade survivors may still hide in forgotten rolls or inherited boxes, waiting for someone with knowledge and curiosity to recognize their significance. And every new discovery reignites excitement, reminding the world that history is not static, that it can resurface unexpectedly, and that value is often hidden behind familiarity. And this dynamic fuels constant interest online, viral discussions, and passionate debates. Because the idea that a penny connected to the end of World War II could still change lives today is irresistible, and beyond financial value, the 1945 wheat penny carries a narrative power that few objects possess. It connects directly to soldiers returning home, families reunited, factories shifting from weapons to consumer goods, and a society cautiously rebuilding. And holding such a coin is like holding a heartbeat from that moment, a tangible reminder that even after unimaginable destruction, life continued, commerce resumed, and small things like pennies mattered again. And this resonance ensures that the 1945 wheat penny will never fade into obscurity, because it speaks to resilience, endurance, and the quiet continuity of everyday life. And as long as people care about history, about hidden value, and about the extraordinary potential of ordinary objects, this coin will remain a centerpiece of fascination and pursuit, a symbol of how the end of one era can become the beginning of another legend. And if stories like this inspire you and you want to keep uncovering unbelievable coin histories and hidden fortunes tied to America's past, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay connected for more incredible discoveries. Next, 1957 wheat penny. Picture a single copper cent sliding unnoticed across a counter in the late 1950s, a coin so familiar that no one paused to study it, yet hidden within its warm brown surface was a story powerful enough to challenge everything people believe about money, value, and history. The 1957 wheat penny was born in a year defined by transition, optimism, and quiet tension, a time when America stood confidently on the world stage yet lived under the shadow of the Cold War. Nuclear anxiety, and rapid social change, and while rockets, televisions, highways, and new dreams captured public attention, the United States Mint in Denver continued striking humble wheat pennies by the millions, never imagining that this final stretch of the wheat design would one day fuel legends of enormous wealth. Because the 1957 wheat penny today is tied to an estimated $27 million in combined historical and collector value, a number that sounds unreal until the layers of survival, rarity, condition, errors, and human obsession are fully revealed. Since 1957 was not merely another production year but part of the closing chapter of the wheat penny era, a design that had already witnessed 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and massive industrial transformation, and with the Lincoln Memorial reverse looming just 2 years away. The wheat cent was quietly approaching its end without ceremony, and that silence played a crucial role in its future, because when people know something is ending, they preserve it, but when endings arrive unnoticed, preservation becomes accidental, and accidental survival creates the rarest treasures of all. And in 1957, the Denver Mint struck an enormous number of pennies to satisfy booming post-war commerce, using high-speed presses, aging dies, and production priorities focused on volume rather than perfection. And this environment produced a vast sea of ordinary coins alongside a tiny, elusive population of extraordinary ones, pennies that escaped heavy circulation, pennies struck with unusual clarity, pennies carrying minute errors that would later ignite collector fascination, and most people at the time treated cents as disposable, tossing them into jars, drawers, ashtrays, and glove compartments, wearing them down through constant handling, which means that despite huge mintage figures, truly pristine 1957 wheat pennies are far scarcer today than raw numbers suggest, and scarcity is the first pillar of their modern legend, because value is not born from how many coins were made but from how many survived intact, untouched by the rough hands of everyday life, and beyond survival lies the realm of varieties and errors, where the 1957 wheat penny quietly built its mystique, as overworked dies, repunched mint marks, minor doubled elements, die cracks, cuds, off-center strikes, and subtle planchet irregularities slipped through quality control, unnoticed in an era when pennies were not closely scrutinized, and decades later collectors armed with magnification, research, and patience began identifying these differences, realizing that the Denver Mint's output contained far more complexity than previously believed, and while some varieties are subtle, others display dramatic visual impact, enough to instantly separate an ordinary cent from a potential headline maker. And as documentation improved and authentication standards tightened, confirmed high-end examples began commanding astonishing prices, especially those graded at the highest levels, where blazing original luster, sharp strikes, flawless fields, and untouched surfaces elevate a simple cent into an object of fierce competition. And auction after auction demonstrated that elite collectors were willing to pay extraordinary sums not just for rarity but for perfection. Because perfection in a common coin is paradoxically one of the rarest conditions of all, and as these top-tier 1957 wheat pennies disappeared into long-term collections, museums, and private vaults, the available supply shrank even further, intensifying demand and pushing values upward in dramatic leaps rather than gradual steps. And over time, analysts began to speak not just of individual record sales but of the aggregate weight of the category, the combined worth of the finest known examples, the rarest varieties, and historically documented pieces, and when these numbers were tallied, the results stunned even seasoned numismatists, with the 1957 wheat penny representing an estimated $27 million in big money history, a figure built not on hype but on decades of research, rivalry, emotional attachment, and the human desire to own something irreplaceable. And what gives this coin such enduring power is its position at the edge of an ending. Because 1957 sits just before the wheat penny vanished forever, and that proximity imbues it with nostalgia, a sense of last chances, of moments slipping away unnoticed, and collectors respond deeply to that feeling, because it mirrors human experience itself. How often significance is recognized only in hindsight, and the 1957 wheat penny embodies that lesson in copper, a reminder that everyday objects can carry extraordinary meaning, and that value is not always obvious at the moment of creation. And the story remains alive because it is unfinished, because undiscovered high-grade examples may still exist, because misattributed varieties may still hide in old albums, rolls, and inherited collections, waiting for someone with knowledge and curiosity to unlock their potential, and every rediscovery reignites excitement, proving that history is not fixed but dynamic, capable of surprising those willing to look closer, and this possibility fuels constant interest online, viral discussions, and passionate searches. Because the idea that a penny from 1957 could still change a life today is irresistible, And, beyond money, the 1957 Wheat penny resonates as a symbol of post-war America, of optimism mixed with uncertainty, of growth shadowed by tension, and of a society moving fast enough to miss the quiet end of a beloved design. And holding such a coin connects the present directly to that moment, making it more than currency, more than metal, but a storyteller, carrying the memory of an era when the future felt both bright and fragile, and that emotional resonance ensures that the legend of the 1957 Wheat penny will continue to trend, continue to inspire, and continue to shock those who never imagined that a single cent could represent $27 million in hidden history. So if stories like this spark your curiosity, and you want to keep uncovering unbelievable coin legends and fortunes hiding in plain sight, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay connected for more incredible discoveries. Next, 1946 Wheat penny. Imagine a single copper penny quietly entering circulation at a moment when the world was trying to learn how to breathe again, a coin born not during war and not fully in peace but in the fragile space between, when factories were shifting, soldiers were returning, families were rebuilding, and the future felt wide open yet uncertain. This was 1946. The first full year after World War II, and the Wheat penny struck that year carries a story so deep, so layered, and so emotionally charged that it has become one of the most fascinating chapters in American coin history, because the 1946 Wheat penny is far more than a 1-cent piece. It is a physical witness to recovery, transition, and the reshaping of a nation, and today it stands connected to an estimated $32 million in combined historical and collector value. A figure that seems impossible until the full journey of this coin is understood, because 1946 was unlike any year the United States Mint had ever experienced before. The war was over, but its effects were everywhere. Machinery was worn down from non-stop wartime production, skilled workers were exhausted, materials had been rationed for years, and yet the demand for coinage surged as commerce exploded in a newly liberated economy. And in this environment the mint struck millions of wheat pennies at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, pushing equipment hard, reusing dies beyond their ideal lifespan, and prioritizing speed over perfection, conditions that quietly laid the groundwork for rarity, errors, and long-term scarcity, because while raw mintage numbers appear high, survival quality is the true measure of value, and in 1946 almost no one saved pennies intentionally. People were focused on moving forward, spending money, building homes, starting families, and enjoying peace, so cents were used heavily, worn down quickly, lost, discarded, and forgotten, which means that today truly high-grade 1946 wheat pennies are far scarcer than most people realize, and this scarcity forms the first pillar of their modern legend, because value is created not by abundance but by survival against the odds, and beyond condition lies the second pillar, the chaotic beauty of varieties and mint errors, because the post-war transition created an unstable minting environment where doubled dies, repunched mint marks, weak strikes, die cracks, cuds, off-center strikes, and subtle design inconsistencies slipped through unnoticed, and decades later collectors with sharp eyes and deep knowledge began identifying these anomalies, realizing that the 1946 wheat penny existed in far more forms than the standard catalogs once suggested, and among these, certain double die obverse examples became particularly desirable, showing visible doubling in Lincoln's date, lettering, or profile. Dramatic evidence of misaligned dies that escaped detection during production, and when authenticated examples surfaced, they shocked the collecting world, commanding prices that redefined expectations and drew intense competition, because they combined rarity, visual impact, and historical significance in a single copper disc. And the Denver and San Francisco issues add even more depth to the story, because each mint faced unique challenges, staffing changes, equipment wear, and production pressures, resulting in distinctive strike characteristics that experts now study obsessively, examining everything from mint mark placement to die state progression, because in the high end of the market, tiny details separate an ordinary collectible from a 6- or 7-figure treasure, and as grading services refined their standards and collectors became more sophisticated, demand for the finest known 1946 wheat pennies intensified, especially those with full original luster, sharp details, minimal marks, and untouched surfaces. Coins that appear almost unreal given how heavily cents circulated at the time, and when such examples appear at auction, they ignite bidding wars fueled by both logic and emotion, because collectors understand that opportunities to acquire top-tier 1946 cents are extraordinarily rare, and once absorbed into major collections they may not resurface for decades, if ever, and this absorption creates upward pressure on value that compounds over time, not gradually but in dramatic leaps. As each record-breaking sale resets the perceived ceiling, and over the decades these individual moments accumulated into a larger narrative, an aggregate legacy, where the combined worth of the rarest varieties, highest graded business strikes, finest proofs, and historically documented era coins from 1946 began to be discussed not in thousands or even millions but in tens of millions, and when analysts consider museum holdings, privately insured collections, and known elite examples together, the number that emerges is staggering. Roughly $32 million representing the big money history of the 1946 wheat penny, a figure built on rarity layered upon history layered upon emotion, because collectors are not just buying copper, they are buying the first breath of peace, the transition from survival to rebuilding, and that emotional weight amplifies desire in a way few coins can match. And what keeps the 1946 wheat penny endlessly compelling is the sense that its story is still alive. Because undiscovered varieties may still exist, misattributed coins may still sit unnoticed in old albums, rolls, jars, and inherited collections, waiting for someone with knowledge and curiosity to recognize their significance, and every new discovery reignites excitement, proving that history is not finished revealing its secrets, and this possibility fuels constant interest online, viral discussions, and passionate searches. Because the idea that a penny tied to the first year of true peace after a global war could still change lives today is irresistible, and beyond money, the 1946 wheat penny resonates as a symbol of renewal, of cautious optimism, of a world learning to live without sirens and ration books, and holding such a coin connects the present directly to that fragile moment when everything felt possible yet uncertain, making it more than currency, more than metal, but a storyteller carrying the memory of rebuilding, resilience, and quiet hope. And that resonance ensures that the legend of the 1946 wheat penny will continue to grow, continue to trend, and continue to astonish those who never imagined that a single cent could represent $32 million in hidden history. So if stories like this fire your imagination and you want to keep uncovering unbelievable coin legends and fortunes hiding in plain sight, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay connected for more incredible stories. And the story deepens even further when you look beyond the minting floor and into the lives of the people who actually used the 1946 wheat penny, because this coin passed through hands that had just survived years of fear, separation, and sacrifice, hands that were now rebuilding homes, starting businesses, buying groceries without ration books, and slowly rediscovering normal life. And every scratch, every worn edge, every softened detail on surviving examples tells a human story of movement, exchange, and persistence, which paradoxically makes the untouched survivors even more extraordinary, because they stand apart as silent witnesses that somehow escaped the rush of post-war America, perhaps set aside unintentionally, lost in bank storage, forgotten in desk drawers, or preserved in original rolls that no one thought to open for decades. And when such rolls finally surfaced in the late 20th century, they sent shockwaves through the numismatic community, because collectors suddenly realized that the population of high-grade 1946 wheat pennies was even smaller than previously believed, and this realization triggered a reassessment of value that rippled across auction houses, price guides, and private negotiations, driving demand upward with a force fueled by both logic and emotion. And as more research was published, more dye varieties were documented, and more high-resolution imaging revealed subtle diagnostics, the 1946 wheat penny became a favorite subject of advanced study, with experts debating strike characteristics, dye states, and mint-specific quirks late into the night, Because this coin sits at a unique crossroads, not ancient enough to be mythologized automatically, not modern enough to be dismissed as common, but perfectly positioned to capture both historical significance and modern collector passion, and this balance is rare, making the 1946 wheat penny a magnet for attention whenever discussions of hidden value arise. And as the Internet age amplified these discussions, stories of incredible finds began circulating widely, tales of inherited collections yielding pristine examples, of overlooked cents discovered in old albums, of misidentified varieties finally authenticated after years of doubt, each story adding fuel to the legend and reinforcing the idea that history still has surprises left to give. And this ongoing discovery process is part of why the estimated $32 million valuation remains dynamic, rather than static, because it reflects not just known coins but potential, the belief that additional elite examples may still emerge, altering population reports and resetting benchmarks, and that belief keeps collectors engaged, searching, and willing to invest extraordinary resources into a single year of 1-cent coinage, and beyond the market mechanics lies something deeper. The emotional resonance of a coin that represents the first true step into a post-war world, a world where hope was cautious but real, where progress felt possible again, and where small things like pennies regained meaning as symbols of stability. And holding a 1946 wheat penny today connects that emotion across generations, linking modern hands to those that once trembled with relief at the end of conflict. And this connection elevates the coin beyond mere collectible status into the realm of cultural artifact. And cultural artifacts command loyalty, reverence, and long-term value in ways that purely speculative items rarely do, ensuring that interest in the 1946 wheat penny will not fade with trends but endure as long as history itself remains relevant, and as museums curate post-war exhibits, as historians tell stories of recovery, and as collectors pass their treasures to the next generation, this humble cent will continue to appear, quietly asserting its importance, reminding us that monumental change often leaves its mark not only in headlines and monuments, but in everyday objects that travel unnoticed through time. And that is why the 1946 wheat penny remains one of the most compelling, most studied, and most emotionally powerful coins in American history, a 1-cent piece that carries the weight of a nation's recovery and a market legacy measured in tens of millions. And if stories like this keep you hooked, and you want to keep uncovering deeper layers of hidden value, forgotten history, and extraordinary meaning behind ordinary coins, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for more incredible journeys into the past.